I decided to further take my research on the controversial topic of the death penalty. The death penalty has been around since the 18th century. Now, of course, like many other things, over time it began to evolve and eliminate things, creating limitations and just other laws prohibiting certain things. For example, back then, there used to be a lot more types of executions. Now, we only have left with the lethal injection. Like back then, they used to have the electric chair. They would place the criminal onto the chair, completely sending their body with shock. That would end up frying the criminal's brain, which led them to figure out it was cruel and unusual punishment. Now that also took place with the hanging of the criminal. They did away with that as well as with the shooting from behind the head. Therefore, since November 1992, anyone who was on death row would only be executed by lethal injection. Since then, 18 states have completely abolished the death penalty, including the District of Columbia, leaving only 32 states with this. Now, Texas is one of those the 32 states that still have the death penalty. Like Michael Perry and Jason Burkett from Into the Abyss, Michael Perry was one that got executed. Jason Burkett was lucky enough to walk away with life in prison 40 years eligible for parole. Jason Burkett did not receive the death penalty because of the fact that they decided that because of his rocky background, the way he grew up was not proper as to how someone is supposed to grow up. They decided that he was not eligible to receive the death penalty. Whereas Michael Perry was not lucky enough, and he did receive the death penalty. Now, during the making of this documentary, it was 8 days prior to his execution date. Michael explains just how he feels being on death row, being locked up in prison. Now, this documentary not only shows the perpetrators, but it also shows the victim's family. It shows Lisa Stotler talking. Lisa Stotler just explains how she felt from not only getting one phone call, but getting two. Because, of course, this was a triple homicide case in Conroe, Texas. Lisa Stotler explains how she felt a misery for years. Because of this, she almost felt like she could not be herself. She lost two people in one day because someone decided that they wanted a certain car that they only had for 3 days. Now, she also mentions that she went to the actual execution of Michael and she reserved her spot and everything. Now, she mentions that she felt a sort of relief when she was there, seeing Michael getting executed. She describes it, she does not have words for it, but she says that she feels a sense of peace. Now, Lisa was probably not the only one who had felt this kind of relief when they went to the person who killed their family member, who killed their friend, or they felt relieved because they know that that person cannot be out there to harm someone else. They know that that person cannot put someone else in the feelings that they have been feeling for many, many years. Now, of course, like any controversial topic, they have people who are for and they have people who are against. Now, the people who are for constantly argue that since they are not getting dehumanized and they are not getting treated like animals that have no complete moral sense, then it's totally constitutional. Now, people who are arguing against say that not only is it more expensive, but what right do we have to make them feel how they made their victim feel? Now, in Texas, it costs us about $2.5 million to have someone executed, whereas it's 3 times the amount that it costs to have someone 40 years in a high security prison. Now, there are certain limitations that prevent someone from being able or eligible to getting the death penalty. Now, in the case of Roper versus Simmons, the Supreme Court decided that people under the age of 18 would be completely unconstitutional to have them receive the death penalty. Since they are just kids, they say that they are not at the full capacity of being able to think like a full-grown adult. Now, Another limitation that the Supreme Court placed in 1986 was that people who are mentally ill are not eligible for getting the death penalty. They have to go through a various amounts of tests in order to prove them incapable, in order to also prove them to be mentally ill. Now, in 2016, a total of 18 people were executed in the death penalty. Now, since 2009, the numbers have been constantly decreasing. This might have multiple reasons to it. Now, it might be that now people are starting to see that not all people are agreeing to having the death penalty. It is a lot harder and a longer process to getting the death penalty rather than getting someone in prison for life without parole. Now, in this documentary, it, like I had mentioned, shows the victims and the perpetrators and just explains how they felt. But it also shows the wife of Jason Burkett, and she's explaining how everybody might see him as a murderer, but at the end of the day, it's her husband and is going to be the father of her kid. Now, Jason Burkett's wife is also mentioning just how their life has been with Jason being locked away. She mentions in their marriage, they didn't even get to hug or they didn't even get to kiss. They always simply just enact by the holding of her hand. And she gets kind of emotional into showing as to how they make contact and how they show affection to each other. She even shows just how they grab each other's hands. Now, although it's showing the perpetrator's family, it still shows just how even they get affected when their family does these sorts of crimes. Now, it goes beyond just the victim's family. It doesn't just affect them. It is giving the complete picture about just how everyone is affected. It also shows Jason Burkett's father. It shows him talking about Michael Perry himself. Now, he's saying that Michael Perry did not deserve the death penalty because he had known him for the whole life, and he says that he had always been a great kid. Now, the justice system might claim otherwise, as they did in his trial, claiming him 10-2 of jurors into the death penalty. Now, this gets determined in a various dates and trials and time. They don't just give the death penalty out to anyone. They give it to people who do treason, terrorism, federal murder, large drug trafficking, attempting to kill a witness, a juror, or a court official, all make you eligible to receive the death penalty. Now, although there are certain circumstances, like I had mentioned, like a mental illness or even being underage, sets limitations to the death penalty, not allowing you, even though committing these crimes, to getting the death penalty. Now, even though you do not fall into these limitations, there is still a chance, much like Jason Burkett, into not getting the death sentence. In the film, we also get introduced to Fred Allen, who was the former captain of the team in charge of the death row in Huntsville. That was where Michael Perry's execution took place. Now, he had been doing this for many, many years, but after over 100 executions, he realized that he was against the death penalty and what it does to the criminals. He mentions a situation of a girl who speaks to him, and that's really when he opened his eyes about doing it. Her song really captures just what the common idea was between whether it was the captain, the victim, the perpetrator, the victim's families, the wife. It shows just how they all mentioned that God has a plan, that God is going to get them through the situation that they're in, that He's going to lead them into making them a better for what they are. Like Michael said in the film, towards the beginning, he says that he tells people, no matter what, that either way it goes or what happens, that it's either he goes home or he goes home. And he's either saying that he goes home to the free world or he goes home to heaven. And he mentions that if he did go on with the death penalty, the execution in which it did happen, he says that he will be up there watching over his mom. Much like Hauser believes, I am also opposed to the death penalty. I believe that there are many injustices that go in form with this sort of punishment. Having there been that not only does it cost more, but you cannot always prove beyond a reasonable doubt. There can always be that suspicion that maybe it is the person, maybe it's not the person. But not there goes many factors that people receiving the death penalty go through. For example, just because certain states have the death penalty does not automatically mean that their crime rates are going to be less than those with the death penalty. Because the death penalty, although it is there, people do not fear. People are still going to commit crimes for the sake of committing crimes. Like, in some statistics, it's proven that states without the execution actually have lower homicide rates than those with the execution. Over the years, there has been less and less support going toward the death penalty. It might be because people are starting to realize that it is cruel. It is too much for the criminal to experience all at once. Now, there are certain statistics that go into the actual death penalty. For example, 55.7% of the victims of the death penalty are white, while meanwhile the other percentage are minorities, Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians or other. Actually, for the most part, all the death row inmates are made up of men. Only 2% of the death row inmates are women. It is quite rare to find a woman in death row getting ready for execution, although it is not completely never done. With this documentary, Herzog is simply explaining just how he feels about death row and about death row inmates, and he not only shows the victims and how they're mourning and stuff like that, but he also shows the perpetrator, and he shows them in a way, and he asks them questions that make them human and make you realize that they are humans, even though they do certain things that us on a daily would not do. Now, it is quite apparent that he is opposed to the death penalty. Although there has been modifications and changes to the way that executions are proceeded, that still does not make this process morally right. There has been many complications going on now, even with the lethal injection. People who have been executed have actually felt the pain of being executed. There's cases that they have been foaming, that they have even uplifted themselves and took the whole gurney with them, and some people even passed out because of how terrible it looked and how terrible it was. How does this serve as a form of justice? Justice is supposed to bring peace to everyone. Now, it might bring peace to the justice system, knowing that they do not have to worry about this criminal anymore, knowing that that criminal is completely taken off and never is going to kill another person. Whereas the victim's family might feel the same way. Although this does not completely solve the problem of homicides. As I have said before, having the execution does not lower the rates of homicides. It might, in states that do not have it, it even gets lower. With there being less support and more consideration of the death penalty, there has been only 18 executions in total in 2016. And since 2009, the amount of people who are getting executed has been on a downhill. This means that the numbers are going down, and smaller portions of people are going through this process. Now, Herzog does a terrific example of showing and capturing the raw emotions of just these families and victims and people going through this and how they felt. Maybe in a few years there will be a complete abolishment of the death penalty, meaning that there will be no more executions allowed in the United States of America.